Okay, do you guys hear me? I know that I'm still displaying the starting soon that I'm taking off now. I'm going live this time without the camera. It's not working for some reason, and I only started preparing for this call like 2 minutes prior to the call, which was not enough to troubleshoot why the camera is not on. Um, if you could help me confirm that you see my screen, which doesn't sound like the case, and you hear me. Uh, Screen on, voice is clear. Thank you very much. For some reason in the YouTube studio control panel, my screen is not showing up, but I'll take your word for it. Okay, sounds good. Let's get started. For those of you who are joining for the first time, the objective from these live streams is to help you with flows. If you're learning flows, if you're looking to practice use cases, so we're going to I'll prepare a use case or some topic to discuss during the live stream, and you can bring your own use cases or questions or comments, and we can discuss these live. I'll be building stuff with you guys, and feel free to stop me at any time to ask why or how or any of this, and feel free to have your own dev org as well if you want to follow along. The use cases that we are covering today, and we did start with this last time. And that is from Camp Apex website. We're not writing any of this in Apex. We're just we picked up a project from Camp Apex, and then we're building everything in there with flows. If there is something that can only be done with Apex, then we're just skipping that. The focus of this stream is just flows. So I'll just go to the home screen, to the home page anyway, because it looks like I'm logged out. If you haven't done so already, you're gonna need a dev org, and once you have that dev org, you need to install a package for this project, and you're gonna find this if you go to projects, and then the project that we did almost half of the challenges is Event Cloud. After you start Event Cloud in the first use case, we're skipping the introduction and the Git lesson. We're skipping these two, and then we started here. After you log in, then you will see a button here to install the package if you have not done so already. I'll just log in with a test org that a dev org that I prepared beforehand, and I'm gonna go back here and refresh. And then we're gonna resume where we stopped last time, and we stopped here. If this is your first time, you can continue with us. I didn't think any of what we're building is you don't have to build the previous challenges. You can continue with us today, and then feel free to build the other challenges at a later time. Okay, with no further ado, let's read through this. So this is the user story. We need to set the sponsors tier based on the contribution amount. We need to set the sponsors tier based on the contribution amount. Let's read through the acceptance criteria. Feel free to read through the user story. In the acceptance criteria, we need the tier field to be set to these values based on these values. So we have a contribution amount field, and we have a tier field, both of which exist on the sponsor object. Let's look at that in Salesforce. Let's see what that looks like. I'm going to go to the Event Cloud application that was installed as part of the package. And there is this sponsor field. Every time before I build any automation, I do it manually first to see what that looks like from an end user perspective before going ahead and automating stuff. So when we create a new sponsor, we're going to see that we have a tier here, and that's a bronze, silver, and gold. And in the help text, it says calculated based on the sponsor's contribution amount. And I see the contribution amount here, the amount of money the sponsor has contributed towards this event. This is the kind of description that I don't really like. I mean, contribution amount, this is the amount of the sponsor is contributing. So redundant. I don't see a reason for this help text. It's not helping me with anything. It's just saying the same thing. So the help text is generally a good thing to do, but having naming fields properly is much more important. On the UI, you do see the help text, but in other places like the IDE or in flows, you don't see the help text. You just see the name of the field, which is the most important thing. So based on what we read from the acceptance criteria, depending on the amount that's in here, then we need the tier to be set. So before going ahead and building this, I have to think about a few things, and that's basically what if. So what if the user populates the amount and leaves the tier blank? What if the user populates the tier and leaves the amount blank? What if both of them are left blank? What if both of them are populated? So we're just like, these are like these four what if scenarios. If you have like two fields, you always have these questions. You want to always ask these questions. When do you want the flow to trigger? Do you want it to trigger based on the first scenario, the second scenario, or all of them? The package is in any of the use cases. Maybe like you can navigate to this use case and it should appear to the right side here. So you might need to navigate to lesson 3 onward, lesson 3 or 4 or something, and then you should see the package in here. Let me know if you can't, if you don't see it. All right. So while this is what I'm thinking about, like, when do I want the flow to trigger? Do I want it to trigger when both of them are left blank? No, we need the amount to be entered first, which makes us ask the question, do we need to make the contribution amount required? If someone is sponsoring an event, maybe the amount is required, or maybe at least, I mean, it does feel like it. If I were speaking with a customer, I would ask them if would there ever be a sponsor without actually contributing an amount? If that's the case, then maybe we don't have to make that field required. I'm just thinking about the design aspect of things. The package will be under projects and then event cloud. So you're going to go to projects, and then start event cloud, and then navigate to any use case. I'm going to go to the tier, any use case, and the package should be to the right side here. Okay, resuming. So I'm assuming that a sponsor means that they need to contribute an amount. So I might, from a design perspective, I might make the contribution amount required at the UI level, not necessarily at the API, at the field level, but maybe at the UI level. If it is, I could potentially create a before save flow to require the contribution amount anyway. So this is one thing from a design perspective. So now that we have the amount populated, we're going to have two scenarios when the amount is populated. The amount is populated and the tier is left blank. This is the first scenario. And then the second scenario is the amount is populated and the tier is populated as well. So if someone is intentionally populating the tier, then we don't want the flow to trigger. We need it to trigger when there is an amount and there is no tier specified. And the last thing, well, I mean, I think that's all the scenarios. So I think the last one is the one that we need to go ahead with, And it does actually, the scenarios here are covered as well. If the contribution amount is blank, then we leave that here blank. If the contribution amount is 0 or less, we continue to leave it blank. If it is less than 1000, which means greater than 0, then that's a bronze. And then the two other silver and gold are following the same, a similar pattern. Let's go ahead now and build that. But like I'm also thinking about one other thing. Whenever you build a record triggered flow, it's going to ask you, should this run on create or should it run on update or both? Now, when do we want this to run? It doesn't seem to matter to be on create or on update. Whenever the contribution amount is populated, where the tier is not populated, we need it to trigger. So it doesn't matter on create or on update. So we're gonna get it to run on both of them. Let's go ahead and do that. From the sponsor tab, I'm gonna go to the gear icon and then edit object, from which I can navigate to flow triggers. Whenever I create a record triggered flow, I prefer to create them in this manner, and instead of going to flows. When you do it from the object, it automatically starts a record triggered flow. It automatically populates the object. Let's select created or updated. Now let's set the conditions. Like the entry conditions are very important. Like 99% of the time, you need to set entry conditions, and you need to try to make them as tight as possible to make it run only when those conditions are met. You don't want flows to keep running with or without a need. So the conditions that we have here are, first, the contribution amount must be populated, and the tier must be not populated. But here's the thing. This record will be in one of two scenarios. It's either on create or on update. If you are creating a sponsor for the first time, and then you populate the amount, and then you click save. I'm not going to save, but if you click save, now I'm going to ask you a question. Did the amount change or not? It didn't change. I don't know why I'm answering the question. It didn't change. It's basically set for the first time. So there is an operator in the flow called is changed. So if I select the contribution amount and I select is changed true, and then you create a new record, it's not going to trigger the flow. And instead, we're going to go with is null false. But so like I'm going to go with is null false, meaning the contribution amount does have a value. When the contribution amount does have a value, this is one of the conditions, then we need this to run. We're going to write the remaining conditions now. But when is null false, that's when the record is created. However, what if it gets updated? And here's a scenario. Someone creates, let's look at this here. The bronze is 1000, and then so if a contribution amount is less than 1000, that's bronze. If it's more than 1000, then that's silver. Let's say someone is creating a sponsor, and when they created the sponsor, they put 900, which is bronze, and then they clicked save, and then they realized that they made a mistake and the amount was actually 1200. And then they go and update the contribution amount from 900 to 1200. Do we need the flow to trigger in that case? We do. But here's the thing, if the condition is this, contribution amount is null false, will it trigger? It's not going to trigger, because prior to the change, the contribution amount did have a value, and after the change, the contribution amount had also a value, except that the value is different. So is null false is actually met. Well, as a matter of fact, it's actually going to run in both scenarios, because the contribution amount is null false. Let me ask it a little differently. Sorry, like I went on the wrong direction. If someone goes and updates something else, so let's just say like John or something, and then this is accepted for whatever event, and then just any email. So this is the first sponsor. Now, if someone goes ahead and changes this status from accepted to pending, and then click save, it's going to trigger the flow again, because is null false is met. That's the condition that we set in here. Is null false is met. So it's going to run again. If I'm going, if I go ahead and change the status again to accepted and I click save, it's going to trigger the flow again, because this is met. Is null false? It is met. So the flow keeps running again and again for a reason and without a reason. So what I typically do is I write the conditions of created, and then I add an or statement and I add the conditions of updated. Like this is how I like it to be written down. The conditions of created, and then an or statement, and then the conditions of the updated scenario. Let's think about the conditions for the created only. So if it is getting created, first, how does the flow identify that this is just created, not updated? I do that by, let's write a formula instead of this. If there is a function called isNew, so this is going to check if this record is new or not. So if it is new, if it's a new record, and the contribution amount is doesn't have a value, so I'm going to use is blank. When you write a formula, you want to use is blank instead of is null. Is blank checks for null value and blank value. Null checks for no value only. I mean, that might be a conversation. But let's put it this way. If you have a text field and you write something down, no, sorry, if you have a text field on a record, and then you save the record without putting any value in that text field, then that text field is null at this point, because it did not receive a value yet. After you click save, and then you go ahead and edit that text field, and you put some value in it, and you click save, now it doesn't have a value. Now, if you edit it for the third time and you clear that value and you click save, now it becomes a blank. It's not exactly null. It's more like it doesn't have a value of blank. Or if you put a space in a text field, then it doesn't exactly have a value. It's blank. I think this is not the best explanation, but blank is generally checks for blank and null values. The contribution amount needs to be populated. So I'm going to select the triggering record and then contribution amount. I need to make sure that it's not blank. So I'm going to use the not operator here. So what I wrote so far, let me do this. I think this is how you put a comment. This is on create criteria. And then I'm going to add an or statement here. And then I'm going to write down the on update criteria. So when a record gets created, this is how we know how the flow would know that this is a new record. And the contribution amount is not blank, meaning there is a contribution amount. There is an additional condition that we need to add here, which is the tier is left blank. If the tier is already populated, we don't want it to run. So we need to make sure that the tier is actually left blank. So I'm going to use blank again. And I will use the triggering record and then tier. So these are the conditions that I can think of to trigger on create. Now let's do on update. On update, we need this to run whenever the contribution amount changes. So if someone is creating the sponsor record for the first time and they did not leave, they did not populate the contribution amount, and then they save, and then later on they edit the record and they add the contribution amount, and then they save again, then the value changed from no value or blank to a value. So the operator is a change is going to return true. So whatever change happens in the contribution amount is going to trigger this flow. So let's do that. We're going to use the is changed operator, and then we'll use the field contribution amount. So whenever the contribution amount changes, then we need this to run. And we need to also have the other condition where the tier is blank. Only run if the tier is blank. If the tier is already populated, then we don't want it to run. But now that I'm actually thinking about it, if the amount changes from one bucket to another, if it changes from this bucket to this bucket, then we, even if the tier is populated, we need it to run. Even if the tier is populated, we need it to run. So we don't want this. We need it to run whenever the contribution amount changes. You could potentially, I mean, someone might update it from 900 to 800, which remains within the bucket, but then we're gonna have to write more logic for to account for this. Or maybe we're gonna have to write the like this logic in the entry criteria, which might sound like a better performance if you're gonna write all of this in the entry criteria, but because we have only 3 values, it does sound like feasible. But if we have 10 values, then it gets out of hand. I'm gonna keep it as is. So this is on update criteria whenever the amount changes, and this is the on create criteria. I'm just gonna delete these. I like to the format. I like it to do it like this. This is the on create conditions, and then an or statement, and then the on update conditions. You're gonna need to wrap these in parentheses like this, and then these in parentheses as well. So I just put a parenthesis at the beginning and then at the end, and same here as well. I wish Salesforce would introduce the tab so that we can just, like, add these on, format them a little bit better. And we need this to run on fast field updates, and every time this record is updated. I'm just gonna pause for a second to look at the comments. The is null false will fire in both, since a value makes it fire. That's right. It will continue to run with is null false. You could. So Sean is asking, can you use some criteria or conditions in the entry criteria and then some other conditions in the decision elements? You could do that, but in the decision element, the flow got triggered. It started. So that alone takes a little bit of performance. I know we're talking milliseconds, but if you can stop the flow from running in the entry criteria, do that. Like you would do a decision element only if you can, or like only if it makes it complex, or we can't exactly do it in the entry criteria. But if you can set very tight entry conditions, then you want to do that first for performance. You don't want the flow to run. There is that statement that I heard from Evan Ponter, as far as I remember his name, and he said that like a flow that doesn't run is the most performant flow. So you basically want your flow to run only if conditions are met. If they are not met, then you don't want it to run. It's a like Kiwi also said, like having the, if it's an entry, you see the keyword is it an entry condition or not? If it's an entry condition, then it better be in the entry conditions, because that that triggers the flow or not. That's these conditions are they determine if the flow is going to run or not. A decision logic doesn't determine if the flow runs or not. The flow runs anyway. And then when it gets to the decision element, then it's going to evaluate, go for a fourth or not, and then ends the flow, which means a flow interview started and then it ended, which means it well, I mean, it's an additional step in the transaction, some additional logic in the transaction. If it doesn't run, then that's better performance-wise. There is still, I mean, sometimes I would do things outside of the entry conditions. Maybe it's more for clarity. Sometimes it's like, you know, the entry conditions might be a lot confusing. You might want to, like, a decision element is more clear what's going on because it's visual. It's not just like lines like this. So you might have a valid argument to go with decision elements, but you know, doing so, like, we have to be mindful that we are intentionally doing that, knowing that we are sacrificing a little bit of performance. Down here, I'm gonna select every time a record is updated because I kind of don't care, because I'm accounting for this in my criteria. If it's new, then these are the conditions. If it's changed, then these are the conditions. So it doesn't really matter much which one I select in here. Because I'm using is changed, so I need it to run every time. Every time it's going to evaluate if the contribution amount changed or not. I would use only when a record is updated. If you were, for example, to use is null false, so contribution amount is null false, and then you set it when only when a record is updated to meet the condition requirements. So if we were to do not is null and then the contribution amount. If we have this, and then I select only when a record is updated, this is similar to is changed from some other value to, or like from not meeting the condition to meeting the conditions. So if the contribution amount changes from not having a value to having a value, then it's going to run. But in our case, we're just not using this. We might come across a situation where it makes more sense. It helps us explain this better later on. I'm running this in fast field updates because we are performing an update on the same record. If you are updating other records, then you might want to go with actions and related records. And remember our rule of thumb: if we don't know which one we need to go with fast field updates. If it stops you from doing what you're trying to do, then it means you need to change to actions and related records. Now that we have written all of this, I'll show you a different way to do it without writing the formula. Can I, let me see if I can. Do this. I'll just copy this in a note for a second, just to keep it for reference. Okay, now I'm gonna change this to just all conditions, and I'll show you something interesting here. So I'm gonna write the same thing with the declarative conditions instead of writing a formula. So I'm gonna select, first I'm gonna write the conditions for onCreate. When it gets created, where the ID is null, true. Now, this has to do with these two options down here. Like, this condition has to do with what we're selecting down here. If we select fast field updates, remember, the flow is going to run before the record is saved to the database, meaning the record does not have an ID yet. Meaning ID is null true is going to be met. This condition is going to be met. So if this condition is met, then we know that this is a new record. If someone is actually creating a new record and then they click save, the record got created in the database, and then later they make a modification, they make an update, then this condition is not going to be met because this record does already have an ID. So when you work with fast field updates, you can use this condition, but you can't use actions and related records, because actions and related records is going to run after the record is saved to the database, meaning the record now has an ID. So if you say ID is null true, this is never going to be met because the ID will always have the record will always have an ID. Because we're running it on fast field updates, then we can use this condition. And this line here is equivalent to the function is new. So this line here is the same as is new. So this is a new record. And then the second condition we had was if the contribution amount is not blank. So I'm going to select the contribution amount. And we don't have the option for is null here. So I'm going to select is null, is blank. I'm sorry, we don't have the option for is blank. So I'm going to go with is null. And because it's a new record, so I know that it's not it's either null or not null. There is no option for blank. So is null false, and then the tier is null true. So we're gonna select tier is null true. Now these are the three conditions for the on create. Now let's write the condition for is update. And that's when the contribution amount is changed true. To separate, now you see when I use the is changed operator, this got grayed out, because the moment you use is changed, it means you are accounting for whatever this is asking you to. It's like saying, like, what happens if some field changes value from something to some other value? You are accounting for it already, and it does understand that you are accounting for the change situation, so it just gets grayed out because I'm accounting for this already in the conditions. I'm going to change this to custom condition logic is met, and the first three are meant for on create, and then the fourth condition is meant for update. You see, entry conditions are important. Making it just like as tight as possible helps reduce the number of times this flow runs. I want to save because I feel like, even though it's just the entry criteria, I feel like we have definitely been talking about this for some time. Okay, and what are we trying to do? Set it here. All right, so we got the flow to run. Now we got the flow to run. We're just gonna ignore the error. We're gonna add stuff now, and then that's gonna be fine. Let me close this. Okay, now we're just going to start writing our decision elements. So it's basically, this is one condition, this is a second condition, this is a third condition, and fourth and fifth. Now people are different in here. Someone might just put one decision element in which add all of these conditions, which works just fine. Another person might just do multiple decision elements, and that's my school. I prefer to create multiple decision elements with yes/no questions over creating one big decision element. So you could create a decision element like this, and then like just name it contribution amount, and then start adding things like the triggering record, contribution amount is blank, true. Now this is the first condition, and then the second condition is, I'm just gonna copy this here. So the contribution amount is greater than 0, and then contribution amount is less than 1000, and then give it a name, and then just like the third and fourth and fifth and all of the conditions. Now that is fine, but I personally don't like it. I think it's more of a personal preference, and I don't think it affects performance in any way. So I don't like this way. I don't like it because it extends horizontally. I like flows to extend vertically so that I can just scroll up and down. That's one thing. Another thing, I like the yes/no questions instead, so that it is clearer in terms when you read it. And the last thing is it evaluates every piece individually in the debug logs. So if you have this decision and then you read the debug logs, then it's gonna tell you not in the debug logs, but in the what is it called, in the path. Like, like when you debug, it shows you which path the flow took. So if you have multiple decision elements, then after each decision, you will see which way it went down, instead of having to look at the debug logs to see which conditions were met or not. I think it's just maybe a personal preference. So I'm just going to delete this, and then I will use yes/no decision elements. I'll start with the first one, and I will ask the question of contribution amount is blank. That's a question. I like I put it in this format, and then yes, and then underscore like this. Maybe like put no, I don't like that. No, I don't like that either. I just typically go with yes, and then in the API name, yes, contribution amount is blank. I like to keep these three consistent like this. And then the other one is just no. How do you know that the contribution amount is blank? By looking at the global variable record. This is the global variable record. If you go into the exclamation mark, you're going to see the API name, the $sign, and then record. This is a global variable. Or you can just find the triggering camp X sponsor, which is the triggering record. That's the label versus the API name. I'm going to check the amount. Contribution amount is blank, false. Contribution, sorry, sure. What's this? True. So the question is, contribution amount is blank, yes or no? If it's blank, then yes. And there's another thing here where it says 0. So I might just like do the same thing in here. Or maybe another decision element, it doesn't matter. Contribution amount is blank. If the contribution amount is blank, then we're not doing anything. We're just ending. End. And then the second one, maybe I should just copy. Contribution amount is 0. Now it's not blank, meaning it has a value. That value might be 0 or more than 0. And then this is yes underscore. I should have copied. I'm just gonna repeat this for the rest of decision elements. Yes, contribution amount is 0, and that is the triggering record amount 0. So I'll just stop talking for a second to get this done. All right, contribution amount is 0. If yes, then you know what? I'm actually thinking about something. If someone updates the contribution amount from a value to 0 or from a value to no value, then we need to actually change the tier. So if someone set the value to 900, then the tier is set to bronze, and then the person went ahead and just changed the value from 900 to 0. In that case, we do need the flow to run to set the tier to no value. So as a matter of fact, we do want to set the tier. We do want to set that tier. So if it is blank, even though we might think that it's not changing, but that's the scenario that I just mentioned. Someone changes it from a value to something other than a value. In here, I'm going to change the tier to no value. So I'm going to assign no tier. So that's the triggering record tier. We're going to need to set this tier to nothing. So I'm just going to leave this blank like this. And if the contribution amount is 0, then we're doing the same thing. I'm going to click the plus icon, and then I'm going to connect it to element, and I'm going to connect it to this one. So in those two scenarios, we need to assign no tier, remove the tier in some sense. So if this tier had a value, we're removing that value. Let's continue with the other decision elements. Let's say now, I'll just ask the question bronze. bronze. Yes. Bronze. And no. And that's the triggering record amount greater than 1000 0, and then less than 1000. So these are the conditions for the bronze, and then we're just gonna keep repeating now. I'll just paste this here and then paste this here, and then I'll just get the other two. So this is silver, and that's greater than 1000. It's greater than or equal to 1000, greater than or equal to 1000, and less than 5000. And then the last one here is gold. Gold. And that's anything that's greater than 5000. So I'm gonna get rid of this, and greater than or equal to 5000, greater than or equal to 5000, then that's gold. Okay. Now, thank you very much, Kiwi. So we account, like we did set the tier to no value for these two. Now we need to set the tier for each one of those. If it is bronze, then we need to set the tier to bronze. So I'm just going to copy this element here and I'll paste it here. And let's say assign bronze, or like I prefer to name it like this, bronze, and then sorry, assign tier bronze. I'll show you like why in a second I name things like this. And the tier here is bronze, and then I'll copy this and I'll paste it here. And let's say assign tier, this time silver, and that's silver. And then we're just repeating assign tier gold, and that's gold. Now the reason I like, you could name this, or maybe let's look here. You could name this assign gold tier. Small things, but like when you build, and you will, if you haven't already, you're gonna build a massive flow in which we have a lot of names, and then naming is gonna be very important. You could name this assign gold tier, and you name this assign silver tier, and name this assign bronze tier, instead of assign tier bronze, assign tier silver, assign tier gold. Now the reason I prefer to do this is down here, because all three of them have the same prefix, or the first two keywords in the beginning, assign tier, then the remaining is sorted alphabetically. So it's gonna sort by like A, B, C, D, E. So like, again, it's sorted alphabetically at the end. It's gonna make more sense if we were to add a number at the end. So if we have like assign tier 1, assign tier 2, assign tier 3, then it's gonna sort them 1, 2, 3. Instead of, for example, using assign, we're gonna need a different scenario than this one to see this this problem. I can't put it together in my head now. Excuse me. Okay, so far what we're doing for each one of those, we're assigning the tier for the triggering record. And because we're running this flow in before save, we don't need to use an update element. We don't need to use an update element. The B4C flow is as if when you're creating the record, and you put the contribution amount, and then you go ahead and click save. The moment you click save, it's like someone just like went ahead and just calculated and did this before the record goes to the database. Like someone just like ran quickly and just populated this before the record got saved to the database. So you didn't need an update element. It's like as if you did it yourself. It just you got a bot or a robot to do it for you. So just by assigning the value on the triggering record, that's it. We're done. Let's save this and let's start testing. Let's debug. Run in rollback mode. Let's create a record to meet our to see like what happens. Let's say just let's try the scenario where there is nothing. Let's just leave everything as is. Let's activate. Just I'm conscious of the time. I would typically do that in the in debug, but just let's just do that. Let's save the expectation again. What is the expectation, and then what's the actual result? Let's save. The expectation is nothing happens. That's our previous automation. I'll just populate this. The expectation is nothing happens, which is good. Now let's create another. And let's populate the amount with 0. The expectation is, again, nothing in the tier. Again. Sounds good. Now let's do, we're just testing on create. We've got a bunch of scenarios for on create and then a bunch of scenarios for on update. Let's set this to 500. The expectation is that it sets the tier to bronze. Unbelievable. I keep forgetting it every time. So we're setting this to bronze. Now let's try another where we set this to 1200, which is silver, the email, and then save. Silver. Let's try another on create. And then 6000. And then the expectation is that this gets set to gold. Okay, it's gold now. Now the update scenarios. Let's update this to from 6000 to 4000, which the expectation is that goes down to silver. It does. Now let's change this to 500. The expectation is goes down to bronze. And if we actually set it to 0, then it goes to null, no value. I'm gonna bring it back to bronze to test the last scenario, which is clearing the value, not setting it to 0, but rather clearing it altogether. And then it removes the tier. So it is responding to every one of the scenarios that we accounted for. It's a lot of thinking about what if. But I mean, you can't. It's either you're gonna think about all of these what if during the build, or even before the build, or you don't think about them and then you debug and then test, and then you're gonna stumble into those scenarios anyway. And you're not gonna think of every single use case and everything single scenario. End users are going to surprise you with something that you didn't account for and you didn't expect it's going to happen, and then we adjust as we go. So I didn't expect one challenge to take that much time, and I don't think we have enough time to tackle another challenge today. So do you guys have any questions, anything that we can casually talk about before wrapping up today's stream? I gotta fix my camera. I'll do that later. Any questions, any concerns? I know that there is a little bit of a lag for the stream. It's not exactly a lag, but looks like it streams a few seconds after I do stuff. At least that's how I see it. So I'm just gonna wait a little bit to see. I do. Thank you, Toyin. I appreciate you. I do play League of Legends, Summoner's Rift. Sadly, I mean, like, I was trying to set up like a different desktop so that I don't forget to close things. But yes, I do play like League of Legends. I like strategic games as well, like Frostpunk. Just what is it called? Jagged Alliance, XCOM, all kinds of games. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, everyone. Well, it does sound like nobody has questions. Flow-wise, video game-wise, I'm happy to talk about video games forever. Thank you, Kiwi. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for today. Thank you so much for joining the stream. The session is gonna be it's recorded. It goes live on the channel if you want to share it with us with others. We'll see you next week. Goodbye, everyone.